Good evening, everybody, and welcome, and lovely to see so many people here. We are very delighted to have Joe Bird, Chris Williamson, Pamela Fitzpatrick, and also, of course, and Steve Freeman will be talking on behalf of the RLEF. So, welcome to all our speakers that have come to speak to us tonight. We're very delighted to have all of them, and the topic is perspectives on a party for the left. There's been so much speculation about this new party and when is it going to form and what's it going to be like. So we've asked our speakers here today, Joe Bird from the Green Party, Chris Williamson from the Workers' Party GP, and of course our other speaker who is representing Collective, and that is Pamela Fitzpatrick. So we're very delighted to have all those speakers today and thank them for their attendance in advance. But I'm going to start off with Steve Freeman to give a sort of introduction to the evening. And so over to you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Carol and comrades, and of course our guest speakers. Um, I think the first thing I want to say is most of us here are living in England, not you, Carol, obviously, but most of us are living in England, which is part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, where sovereignty is vested in something called the Crown in Parliament, which is not an easy thing, obvious thing to understand what that really means. And I would start by saying that any radical policy or programme has to address the central question of the state, whether that state is fit for purpose. In other words, the kingdom, the constitution, the powers of the crown, and the union of England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. And I would go so far as saying no democratic or progressive party can really duck these central pillars of the state, unless. But of course, here we are. The UK state is facing a crisis. I mean, we can think of that crisis, which appears to be deepening, appears to be ongoing. We've got it in foreign policy. And we can't talk about that now because we haven't got time, but we've got Zionism, we've got Gaza, we've got the Iran war that's taking place, we've got the Ukraine war. We have got the crisis of climate change, which is threatening to burn up the world. So we've got those massive things. And the thing about foreign policy, I would just say this, is that the people have no real say in foreign policy. The foreign policy is conducted by the Crown. It's conducted behind the backs of Parliament. And we, the people, are really onlookers. We're to watch what's going on and we wonder what's going to happen next. But we don't really have any say or control over it because it's reserved for the powers of the Crown. We have a domestic crisis, which some people call broken Britain. We have a crisis of our democracy. And I think that crisis of democracy is probably now represented really by two things in particular. One, the rise of Reform Party, which again is, something that we're not seeing something happening outside the box, as it were, of normal politics. And then we have the Palestinian movement, where large numbers of people are coming on the streets to support and defend the rights of the Palestinian people. I would call it the democratic part of our society is coming out in defense of the Palestinian people. Broken Britain, 40 years of neoliberal policies. The post-war welfare state, or social monarchy as we call it, is on its last legs. And so we're facing this kind of crisis. I think myself is that the majority of people in England want reform. And I don't mean reform the party. I mean radical reform, i.e. I think the right have been very smart in choosing names like UKIP, Brexit, and now reform, because I think the demand for reform is pitching a powerful appeal to a broken Britain. And so they've got in with that idea. And I think if we, as a left, want to be serious in becoming a force, then we have to make our own case for radical reform. And today, early on, I was reading the Green and the Workers' Party manifestos from 2024. And what I would say is, if we get away from personalities and start looking at policies, I think that's really a way we would find we have a lot more in common than we might imagine. I would mention three reforms that we've highlighted. out of the manifesto we did last year. One is a Parliament for England. Two is the idea of public ownership of all the land. And three is having a new written constitution based on the sovereignty of the people. And there's a whole process to get that. And you'll find some of those things in the manifestos of the organisations here. I did want to begin, however, with the idea of the Commonwealth. A Commonwealth in England. Now, Commonwealth means for me a community. It could be a local community or a nation for the common good. It's not a community for profit, but for common good, the common good of its citizens, health, welfare, security of the people. In 1992, Tony Benn put forward his Commonwealth Bill to the House of Commons, and I still think it's something people have never really taken much notice of. It's a very, very important bill that he put forward. And the opens line says, "A bill to establish a democratic, federal and secular Commonwealth of England, Scotland and Wales dedicated to the welfare of all its citizens." He didn't claim to be socialist, but a society dedicated to the welfare of its citizens. And we put another version of that in the manifesto that we drafted last year, talking about a secular, democratic and social republic founded on the sovereignty of the people and dedicated to the health and welfare of all its citizens. And it's not a new idea, because of course we can go back into our history. We can go back to 1649 and the first Commonwealth. We can go back to the one of Cromwell. We can get to the Revolution. We can go back to 1945 and see that as the welfare state, social monarchy, as a kind of Commonwealth that was created after the war. And we've been living through this 40 years of this destruction of what I call the second Commonwealth. And I was in Sheffield on Saturday, and I went to the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign rally in the middle of Sheffield, and it reminds us the importance of the miners' strike in breaking the social welfare state, the social monarchy, back in the 1980s. But I think the idea of a Commonwealth is not dead, despite 40 years of neoliberalism, and I think it exists in the grassroots level, in communities, in trade unions, in charities, in food banks, in community organisations and campaigns. And I'm sure people who've been doing their campaigning work in their localities will be very aware of those communities in which they themselves exist. But we're talking about building a Commonwealth for a whole country. In other words, setting it on a legal and constitutional basis. I will come towards the end now. Building a new Commonwealth in England, that's what I would like to see. And it does require radical democratic reform. It does require the transfer of power to the sovereign people. We'd need a Republican Party or People's Party. I think all the parties that are going to be speaking here, I know Collective is not a party, but it's campaigning for one. All the parties here have policies that would be part of building a Commonwealth in England. I'm also in favour of socialists forming one party for socialists and communists, but I'm also in favour of left unity with the Green Party. I see the Green Party as part of the left. And I would like to see there being a common programme for a Commonwealth of England that all the left could unite around and cooperate together. Because in the face of threats on the right, we on the left, broadly speaking, have to find ways of cooperating and working together. So it's back to you, Carol. I haven't talked about why England. Maybe that'll come out later, but I'm interested, I think, in policies. I think I'm more interested in policies than leaders, to see, what the main speakers have got to say and how we can cooperate. So I think I'll finish there.
Thanks very much. And within time. Well done, Steve. I'm going to ask Joe Bird of the Green Party. Joe's a Greens councillor now and working very hard, I hear. And so I'm going to bring Joe in to join the discussion. Joe.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to speak on these important issues that Steve has just outlined so well. As Carol said, I'm a Green councillor, have been for 3 years. Before that, I was elected as a Labour councillor. And I also stood as the Green candidate for MP for Birkenhead in last year's general election. We came second and beat reform in every single part of our constituency. My journey with party politics began when Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party, as it did with so many thousands of people across the country. And a couple of years in, I was speaking on a platform with Chris Williamson to protest the unfair suspension of Mark Wadsworth. And it was on that platform that I made the now infamous play on words. I said what we need with the internal disciplinary process is natural justice and due process, or what I call due process, me being Jewish. So I'm now like the Jewish Chronicle forever calls me the due process counsellor. And I was suspended for that, and there was national outcry. Thousands of people took to social media and went used the internal processes of the Labour Party to get me reinstated. And 9 days later, I was. I then stood a few months later for the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party and was suspended in that campaign as well. And Carol and others were involved in getting me reinstated, so I could stand on the ballot paper for NEC. I came fourth for 2 positions. I've worked also, it's great to see Pamela Fitzpatrick here today as well. We worked together quite closely through the Socialist Councillors Network, defending each other from the increasingly hostile authoritarian Labour Party. And so the Labour Party changed its rules and expelled me retrospectively. And at that point, I was like, yes, good. I'm out of this hostile environment. And I was independent for a while, trying to encourage other people to stand as independents, trying to form a network of independents, so on. But it's really hard. Like, it's hard enough being a candidate, putting yourself in the front line in the public eye. But to do so without a party machine backing you is quite difficult. And I took a fresh look at the Green Party, and I realised actually they've been standing up for all the right things for a long time, including in my local area where Greens voted to save the library in my ward, and Labour and Conservatives voted to close it. So I asked if I could join, and they said yes. And honestly, I haven't looked back since. It's been 3 years of really good politics and campaigning and growing the Wirral Green Party, where I am from 1 councillor 7 years ago to now 14 councillors. And a really decent campaign for MP, which we're aiming to win next time. And so I'll give you like 10 good reasons to join the Green Party, 10 things that the Green Party offers, both to you here and to the wider left or wider movement. One is to tax wealth of the super rich. Only the Green Party are the only elected party really pushing that agenda, and it's being picked up by the TUC, by Greenpeace, by lots of other voices in the public debate. Tax the wealth of the super rich, number one. For welfare and not warfare. Why is the Labour government trying to take billions of pounds out of the pockets of disabled people to put it into shiny weapons into the pockets of private shareholders? It's a no-brainer. We should be for welfare, not warfare. Thirdly, for a just transition away from fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are killing us. The planet is burning. We're at record-breaking temperatures today, tomorrow, like in the years to come. Climate chaos, flooding, all of this is driven by fossil fuels, and we absolutely have to have a just transition away from fossil fuels that recognises the industries that will be hit by that and replaces that with things like renewable energy production. Fourthly, for Gaza, we've all been heartbroken by what is happening there. We've been on the streets demonstrating. We've been calling our MPs to stop the arms trade with Israel, to sanction the politicians who are clearly genocidal. These are very clear Green policies on that, and we've been making that case inside Parliament and outside. Fifth is to vote for the next Green Party leader. There's an active leadership contest at the moment, and I'm backing Zach. Zach Polanski is clearly a left-wing leader. He's promoting left-wing policies. He's very good at communicating. Adrian Ramsey and Ellie Chowns, 2 MPs, they're also brilliant. I've got a lot of time and respect for them. They know how to turn a constituency into a green one, to turn hearts, minds and votes and for people to be voting green in enough numbers to win MP. And any member that joins before 31st July, that's the freeze date, they get the chance to vote for the next Green Party leader in England and Wales. There's different parties in Scotland, Northern Ireland, other countries as well. So sixth is to build an even better party. There are democratic processes in the Green Party. It's one member, one vote. When I was attacked again by the Jewish Labour movement, the Labour Party would have suspended me, but the Green Party defended me. And there's the difference between the two in a nutshell. And there's democratic processes. It's one member, one vote. Policy is often decided locally wherever possible, or otherwise by the national conference. And the party isn't perfect. No party is. It's actually quite patchy in different parts of the country, but that can be built on with more members joining. 60,000 members and counting are members of the Green Party now. No other party on the left can compete with that. Seventh is to win many elections, many elections. To build on 850 local councillors already and 4 MPs. We're not that interested in winning a few elections here and there. There's a time and a place for that, and there's often very strong local candidates and very strong local campaigns. Great, good luck. And there's 600 odd MP constituency seats, and there's plenty of room for all of us in that. But the Green Party is serious about winning lots of elections. We came second in 40 constituencies. Reform came second in 100. Green Party is intending to win 40 plus at the next general election, and to make a significant difference in Parliament, and to keep offering the green alternatives in the public arena. Eighth, we need to celebrate diversity and defeat extremism. The extremism that's on the rise in this country is the same kind of fascism that drove my great-grandparents out of Eastern Europe to this country, and my Jewish family that didn't leave perished in the Holocaust. And we need to unite around defeating that kind of extremism and promoting unity, promoting love and care for everybody who is here. But ninth, above all, what the Green Party offers is a future, is hope for our children and our grandchildren. 10th, for a planet that they can all live on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joe. But can I just ask a short question? So which of the policies of the Green Party do you think is going to improve the living standards of people and improve a redistribution of wealth, and so that we haven't got this tremendous inequality in society, and give people more power so that their vote actually counts and they have the ability to change what's going on in the UK? So would you like just to, you have got a couple more minutes left.
Thank you very much.
Like to answer those questions, please?
Yeah. So the wealth tax is a key flagship policy of the Green Party. It would redistribute wealth from the super rich. Those that own 10 million pounds or more would pay 1% of their tax. It would raise billions of pounds, which would be spent on welfare, our NHS, public services, and so on. That would redistribute power and wealth from the few to the many. That's a key. There's a general principle: we should be taxing wealth, not work. We should be taxing income from stocks and shares the same, at least, if not more, than as income from work. These are basic green principles that would redistribute and rebalance our economy, which has become massively distorted. We would renationalise water, rail, energy. Really, long-standing left-wing socialist policies. They're Green Party policies too. This is the Green Party manifesto. I had the pleasure of standing on last year, and it's so similar to this one, the 2019 election, and this one, 2017, which I also campaigned for. There's very few policy differences between them. You asked another question about how do votes count? Well, proportional representation, another long-standing Green policy, so that every vote matters, every vote counts. Proportional representation also makes for better governance. You see other countries across Europe and other parts of the world that have proportional representation. They make much better decisions, more peaceful, less warfare, when the two extreme democracies of the UK and the USA, they're the most kind of warmongery democracies because it's first past the post, so it encourages extremism and division.
Thank you very much. Exactly on time for 10 minutes. So I'm going to ask Pamela Fitzpatrick of Collective to join us now, if I can find her. There she is. Pamela, I'm going to ask you to talk to us now, please.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Hi, Joe. Lovely to see you. I haven't seen you for years, actually, a few years. And also Chris, I was on a platform with him in Brent many years ago, and we had a selfie taken, which was brought up every time I went to any hustings, telling me you've been on a platform with Chris Williamson. Anyway, thank you. Yes. So I was asked to speak a party for the left, some different perspectives. So maybe if I start with saying a little bit about where I've arrived and how I've come to be involved with the collective. So my background is I was brought up in a working class Irish community in Harlesden, which for people who don't know London is a very poor part of London. And I know people reminisce about the 70s, and I heard people saying people were much happier then. But to be honest, most of the people I went to school with didn't go to university, so they didn't benefit from free university tuition and had quite hard lives, because that was when the kind of capitalist kind of crisis was really taking off, I guess, in the 70s. And when we think about all the problems that are going on, all of the problems lie with capitalism, don't they? You know, whether it's the war, the refugees, the housing crisis, all of that. So I've worked pretty much, I joined a trade union as a teenager, and that's what led me to join the Labour Party. I've never been particularly happy with Labour Party policies, but thought that it was the only vehicle for which you could get any improvements for working class people. So I was an active trade unionist. I've been shop steward in, various positions in my branches, so active. And I was a Labour councillor for 8 years in Harrow, where I live. I was the parliamentary candidate in Harrow East in 2019. I was an independent candidate in Harrow West in the last general election. And in my day job, I work in a law centre, and I've worked in this kind of field for many, many years. And in fact, the law centre I work in, I set up 15 years ago because of all the problems that I saw with people living in poverty, housing crisis. And again, I often hear people say, oh, London, they're in a bubble, all the rest of it. Well, I'd love people to see the bubble that people in Harrow live in, because the majority who are on middle incomes or very poor live in private rented accommodation, which are often no better than slums, with toxic mold, damp, and having to pay a fortune for the privilege of living in such a kind of hovel. And so I see asylum seekers every day. My kind of area that I've specialised on over decades has been welfare benefit claimants and asylum seekers, the two areas that the media and most politicians hate and will attack all the time. And what I've seen is every single party basically attacks both those two groups, including the Labour Party, of course, and has done nothing to improve the lives of people in those groups for the past 20 years, at least, probably longer. And it's got worse and worse every year, hasn't it? So that now we have pretty much all the parties involved saying, stop the boats, do this, blaming benefit claimants and migrants for all the ills that have befallen other people. But of course, what it is the policies that have been chosen, particularly around housing, where we sold off council housing, and it's become something to make a profit out of rather than something for somebody's need of housing. So what do? That's not going to be changed by any kind of rent controls. That might help temporarily, but it's not going to help overall. What is going to help is a mass programme of nationalisation. And it's not just, again, tinkering around the edges. We'll nationalise a few sort of companies here, there and everywhere. And what most parties seem to do is that they will nationalise when private company has absolutely destroyed and hollowed out any industry or company. And then the public get to pay for the privilege of making it better again, and then they sell it off again. So we need a mass program of nationalisation, but you also need control of the economy. If you don't have control of the economy, you can't actually change anything. So there's lots of buzzwords that go around and kind of buzz policies. And one of those now is the wealth tax. And of course, I have no problem with the wealthy being taxed more. That's fine, that's great. But if we say that's a way of redistributing wealth in a kind of in a way that's going to make a real difference, it's not. It's never worked before. If you look at every single country where they've tried this, including in the UK, this has not worked previously, because the rich are very good about moving their money. But even if they weren't, the amount of money that's going to be raised is a drop in the ocean. It would be only a very short period helping out the NHS. It's not going to make a difference to people's lives. So you do need control of the economy. So that means thinking about nationalising the banks, not just the water industry and the rail, nationalising housing, nationalising the construction industry. Why are we building houses for profit? If you think about planning, all these homes that are affordable, they're not affordable. I know that because in Harrow, we have masses of buildings that are left empty, that are called affordable, but nobody can actually afford to live in them because they're 80% of the market, rent or sales, and so nobody can live in them. We need, I think, radical policies. We need radical change. And if you think about what's going on around Europe, there are other countries that have, for example, proportional representation, but they're still having the same problems that we are having. They are turning to anti-establishment characters, kind of demagogues, if you like, because they're sick to death of the establishment parties. And that's why people are turning to reform. Why they're turning to, Le Pen previously and their successor in France and in Germany and so on, and with Trump in America. So we need something far more radical. And going back to the manifestos of 2017 and 2019 of the Labour Party, of which, of course, I supported, but then we are not in 2017 or 2019. Things are so much worse, and we need something far more radical than that. So that's why I got involved with thinking about, well, is there a need for a new left party, one that is class-based, democratic, and actually getting away from celebrities, really? Thinking about the policies must be the thing that counts. The programme is what counts. It's not the messaging. It's not who you have as the leader. It's not getting on the right programmes on TV. It's about what you're actually going to offer to make people's lives better. And one of the key things, of course, is housing. Most people just want a decent house with a garden, they can raise their kids and feel that they've got security in their communities. And a decent, secure job that has enough money that they're not queuing up at food banks or, going without food for days or weeks or whatever to feed their kids. So that's where I'm coming from. So I got involved with a group of people around 2023 with the idea of bringing people from the left together to think about forming a new party. So the collective, of course, is not a party. It's just a vehicle for bringing people together. And that's been frustrating, to say the least. But the good thing about it is, one of the problems with the left is that there's been so much arguing. And if people do something, other people are ready to attack them and say, you're not doing it well enough, you should do this, you should do that. That's great. People should do what they want to do. But what I wanted to do with others was to build a kind of unified left, bringing left people together who had that kind of idea. So the collective is now comprised of I think it's about between 60 and 70 representatives of left groups. And some of those are established parties and some are new parties, the kind of independent groups that are springing up. Some are more established parties like Tusk and Socialist Party. And we've been one of the most positive things is that there hasn't been that traditional kind of arguing endlessly but it has taken time to get to a point where we are hopefully, on the point of establishing a new party. But I can't guarantee that because I'm not the person in control of that. So maybe that's a kind of, yeah, so I'll stop there. I'm not going to give a list of policies because the collective doesn't have policies. I've told you what I think is needed for people to actually change things. And to do that, we need to be radical. You can't just think we're going to tinker around the edges again because it doesn't work. And that is what's happening across Europe. When kind of left parties are being strong, then they're doing well and getting support. But when they're not, when they're forging alliances with less left-wing parties, kind of social democrat types, they're actually losing support, and people are going to more establishment, less anti-establishment figures. So I don't know whether somebody said this meeting was about working together. It's quite hard to do that if you've got people pulling in different directions. You need a clear program, in my view. That's my view. I can't say it's everybody's, but I'll stop there for now. And if you want to ask questions, I'm happy to.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, Pamela. Yes, I like your stance on housing. Really, really important. But are these things radical enough? It's not really attacking the main problem in this country, which is the state and what we call the Crown, because they actually have all the power in Parliament through the Crown in Parliament. So I certainly would look for even more radical policies, perhaps, than you've just suggested. But let's go straight on now to Chris Williamson. And bring him in and see what he has to say.
Program of nationalisation, you would not have the Crown. So it's not just nationalising housing. You would have mass programme, nationalise the banks, everything. You wouldn't have a royal family in that kind of situation.
Oh, that's what I wanted to hear. Yes, that would definitely be the case. Yes, I'm glad that I've asked you that question then. Yes, because definitely we would, obviously the royal family is an anachronism in my opinion, quite immoral. And the House of Lords, of course, is shouldn't be there. And so I'm really glad to hear you say that.
Well, I'll just say that's why I disagree with the wealth tax, because you still then have wealth, and that's the problem.
Yes.
That's not the solution. So anyway, I'll stop talking now.
And if we have, and indeed, we don't really, taxing the wealthy is good for it to reduce inequality. But modern monetary theory tells us that actually, as long as we're spending our sovereign currency, we can actually pay for most things that we need, as long as we have the resources and the people. Absolutely. I'm going to bring Chris Williamson in now. I'm glad we've had that little chat at the end there. So, Chris, where is Chris? I'm
here. Thanks very much, Carol.
Oh, there you are. I'm going to bring Chris in now.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, it's good to be sharing a platform again with Joe and Pam. Hopefully, you won't get in trouble this time for being on the same platform as me. But anyway, we've moved on from that period. I mean, people might know what happened to me inside the Labour Party. I ended up basically resigning from the party in just ahead of the 2019 election after being resuspended unlawfully and previously taken the Labour Party to the High Court and succeeding on their second suspension. But it was clear that they weren't going to allow me to stand. And Jenny Formby, who was supposed to be a Corbyn ally, was a Witchfinder General, and it was her recommendation to the NEC that basically delivered the coup de grace. After the election, I, with others, set up a group called Resist, and the idea behind that was to bring together the movement on the left, if you like, to try and be the glue between all the different groups on the left, and not really to establish a new political party. And the view was, or my view certainly at that time, was that if a party, could emerge or would emerge, it would emerge, from the bottom up, as it were, through if there was a demand through the working class. But the main thing was to try and, build a social movement along the lines of, what we were starting to achieve when Jeremy Corbyn became the leader of the Labour Party. But then members of Resist decided that, they wanted to register as a political party, and there was some discussion, and Resist ended up winding up. And I found myself initially trying to rejuvenate the Socialist Labour Party, but that didn't work out. And then joined the Workers' Party, and that's where most Resist members ended up in the Workers' Party, which was established in 2019. I think what we need to do, I mean, it's good to see the talk about trying to, build an alliance, a coalition on the left, but we're good at talking. We're not very good at delivering on that. And as I say, I've joined the Workers' Party, and the Workers' Party was established, as I say, in 2019, and it's had some success. I mean, we're still a small acorn, but we've had some success. We got George Galloway elected in a by-election in Rochdale. We've got councillors up and down the country, and we secured over 210,000 votes at the general election with 153 candidates, I think it was. Had the election been called when we anticipated it being called in the autumn, we would have had probably 500 candidates, and I think the return on votes would have been closer to 1 million, maybe considerably higher than that. And I suspect we might have got a few of our people over the line. But I think what we need to do in terms of building an alternative now is to essentially recapture the spirit of 1945. If people haven't seen the Ken Loach film, I can highly recommend that they do that, because he's done a film called The Spirit of 1945, and that captured the zeitgeist at the time. And I think the best way of building a sort of alternative to the right-wing populism of Nigel Farage and the Reform Party is to promote a left-wing populist alternative. And I think there is a lot of support for that. And what I would urge people on the left is to focus on the areas where we agree, and just have fraternal disagreements with where we are in opposition to particular areas, as it were. But unfortunately, I think what's where the left has gone wrong, and there's a great book called The Death of the Left, written by Steve Hall, Professor Steve Hall, and Simon Winlow, who have both now joined the Workers' Party, I'm pleased to say. They weren't members of the Workers' Party when they wrote the book. And it's a fascinating insight into how the left has gone wrong. It's not all doom and gloom, though. They do talk about ways in which we can extricate ourselves from the situation that we are in at the moment. But one of the things they talk about is the kind of obsession with the focus on identity politics. That's not to diminish identity politics or say that these issues are unimportant, but it poses no threat to the established order. It poses no threat to the establishment. And this is why you see, arch neoliberals and arch neoliberal corporations and the military industrial complex getting full-throatedly behind the whole identity politics agenda. You see the grotesque spectacle of arms manufacturers like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin joining in pride marches. And I think what the Workers' Party is focused on is the right approach, in my opinion, because we're focusing on class politics and economic inequality. And I would refer people to our 10-point program, which is on the internet there. I mean, and the first clause of that is very much a strong commitment to oppose war and imperialism, imperialist financial domination, and then obviously their obsession with war, and also a commitment to leave NATO. And I think the Workers' Party is the only party on the left that has called out the NATO proxy war, that has called out the dictator Zelensky, has not fallen for this nonsense about Putin is a monster and that Russia didn't have any justification for the special military operation that they started in February 2022. I mean, had NATO not rejected Russia's peace and security proposition that was made, I think, in November of 2021, which essentially called for Ukraine to become a neutral country and, for NATO to end its expansion, the war would never have happened. And so I think that's pretty much a unique selling point for the Workers' Party. But we're also very committed to rebuilding British industry, a real commitment to housing and sort of things that Pam was talking about could very much relate to that. Free education from cradle to the grave, scrapping tuition fees, kicking the privateers out of the National Health Service, and indeed all the public sector, providing access to low-cost, good quality food and integrated transport system and so on. Protecting the environment as well is also an important issue, although there are people who would be, you might call themselves climate skeptics within the Workers' Party, but that's not to say that we are against creating a good and clean environment with good air quality and good access to good, unpolluted water and so on. These are really important issues, it seems to me. And we also agree in relation to this notion of a wealth tax. But in my view, I mean, and you touched on, Carol, MMT. I mean, there's good aspects of MMT. It's a good lens, I think, to understand how the monetary system works. Although there are aspects of MMT which I wouldn't necessarily fully sign up to, like the job guarantee scheme. I think a better approach than setting up a kind of temporary employment scheme, which has echoes of the YTS and all the stigma associated with that, is a big expansion of the public sector through a big fiscal stimulus. But we do need tax, obviously, to bear down on inflation, to generate a value for the currency, to drive consumer spending in certain directions, and also to address wealth inequality. So we very much support a wealth tax. But I think we need on the left to get away from this myth that tax funds public expenditure, because that then gives a status to the billionaire class that somehow we need them, that if we don't have these billionaires and if we get a left-wing government in, they'll leave the country. And how will we be able to afford all these good ideas that, left-wing parties are putting forward? Well, we need to sort of address that, it seems to me, head on and say, well, we don't need the billionaires. And indeed, when Alan Sugar said he would leave the country if Corbyn became Prime Minister, I put out a statement saying, great, I'll drive you to the airport, mate, because we don't need bunches of billionaires to actually deliver a good society. So I think that's the sort of thing that, we are talking about. And, as I say, creating this populist left-wing alternative as an antidote to reform and calling reform out, or pointing out, of course, that they're led by a bunch of, merchant bankers and property developers, multi-millionaires, all of them as well. But call them out in relation to their immigration policy, because yes, there are issues about immigration. You can understand working class anxieties about mass immigration and how that impacts on their standard of living. But of course, we need to organise people. But what we say is, well, let's stop the reason why desperate people seek refuge in the first place. Let's stop the imperialist wars. Let's stop the economic sanctions, which impoverish populations, and let's stop the arms sales to these despotic regimes who actually, oppress their people. And if we do that, then you stop the reason why people are seeking refuge in the first place. So I think we can address that issue. That's a thorny issue, and we can address it head on. And this is where the left, I think, has shrunk away from doing that. And the Workers' Party has been not afraid to take that issue and actually come forward with a progressive alternative, a populist left-wing alternative to the appalling right-wing rhetoric of reform. 10 minutes is up now, so I better stop.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Your 10 minutes is up. We did it within time. Well done. I'm slightly disappointed in that nobody, I didn't disagree with anything you said, Chris, by the way, but nobody has mentioned democracy in any of their talks. Things like participatory democracy, citizens' assemblies, bringing the power back to the people in the local communities, these sort of things. So that hasn't been said by anybody so far. Anyway, I have lots and lots.
I'm not against that, Carol, by the way, but I think there is a process that we need to go through. We need to get a hearing first. We need to get an audience. People, I think if you go to people with ideas like that, yes, it will be attractive to the middle classes, but the working class, I think they won't follow that. Political consciousness in this country is incredibly low, and I think what we've got to do is come forward, as I say, with the left-wing populist alternative to the right-wing rhetoric of reform, to get that hearing in the first place, and then actually, but I'm not against the sort of things that you talk about, but I think if you go in first with constitutional reform, I don't think that's the thing that will win the hearts and minds of people. Yes, of course we need constitutional reforms, absolutely. Of course we need electoral reform. I'm hoping actually if Labour are in as bigger doldrums as they are at the moment, as they get near to the general election, having been in that place, I know that they're all careerists, and the thing they prioritise above everything else is maintaining their place. They may feel compelled to bring about some form of electoral reform in order to rescue potentially some seats, because some of the opinion polls are suggesting Labour could be down to as little as 40 seats. So that might be something that, that might sort of help us. But then beyond that, of course, there are other constitutional reforms that are essential. About empowering people, I absolutely agree with you. But I think the first thing, as I say, Carol, you've got to get that hearing, and you've got to put forward, in my opinion, policies which resonate with people, that people can feel that, yes, this is actually speaking to my lived experience.
I think, Chris, you're underestimating the working class. But anyway, that's just my opinion. I've got a number of hands up already. So I've got Norman Rimmel. So I'm going to bring Norman in now.
Thanks very much, Carol. And interestingly, my question relates to exactly what you were asking just now in your remarks a moment ago about getting people involved in politics and our democracy. And it relates to what Steve said in his introduction. Our democracy is broken, and I think we all know the reasons for that. People are fed up with Punch and Judy politics, question time in the House of Commons, professional politicians who are there to line their own pockets a lot of the time. And so on and so forth. But I think also people are worried. Democracy is coming apart because people see that they do not have much opportunity to influence what is going on in governance. They would like to have more say in how they are governed. And my question is, how do we do that? And one possibility I would like you to consider is, as a start, beginning with things like citizens' assemblies, which brings people together, and it brings them together in a united way. It avoids division. I think one of the problems with our system at the moment, it's very, very divisive. This Punch and Judy nonsense in the House of Commons. It's one set of people arguing, insulting the other. Often when people are agreed, in fact, on many things, but the differences between different political parties are emphasized rather than the things that unite them. So my question is, how about citizens' assemblies as a start towards bringing people involved to be involved more in politics? Do you think they're a good start or not?
Thank you very much, Norman. I'm going to bring Alan and then Ian.
Hi, it's Alan Story here. I'm down in Suffolk and right down the seaside. My questions I could ask him. I used to be a member of the Green Party, have very different views than Joe does on the Green Party, but we can get onto that in another moment. My question would be primarily to Pamela. I'm operating on the assumption, but I've read 6-7 pieces now, that in first part of July, that a new mass party of the left is going to be announced, and things sort of going ahead, not national convention. Maybe you could just sort of confirm or deny those rumors, because you're obviously in the collective part of this group led by Corbyn. But my bigger question would be this. Since 2000, there's been a number of attempts to build a new party to the left of Labour. There was a Socialist Alliance. There was Respect. There's been the Scottish Socialist Party. There's been, Left Unity, etc. What lessons in building this new party, this new mass party of the left, would you draw from the history, all failed, of Respect, of the Socialist Alliance, and of the Scottish Socialist Party? I'd be interested in your views.
Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you very much, Alan. I'm now going to bring in Ian Drummond.
Well, on the lessons of Respect, you've got the wrong Workers' Party representative on the platform, perhaps. You can maybe go and ask George later on. I'd like to ask, it's a great panel, by the way, 3 former Labour witch hunt victims and fighters against the witch hunt, now across across the left. And saying that because of the questions I might have to pose a little bit sharply to Joe, that I respect you as one of those who I've campaigned with in the past for the Labour NEC. I think the Green Party, you said, is a good, safer environment, that you've got out of the hostile environment of Labour in that way. But I do always remember how they didn't let Ken Livingstone in deference to that same witch hunt. I know that Zach Polanski is now talking about he wants to grow the party, welcome new members, which should be a nice thing compared to the way we were treated when we were joining over Corbyn and Labour. But would that include Ken? Also, Zach's personal history as a Lib Dem for the first half of Corbyn era, a Green in the second, but one who was very critical of Corbyn's leadership of Labour, both on that witch hunt and on the Europe stuff. As even said in one tweet, summed it all up as a pro-EU Jew, I couldn't join the Labour Party. Has he shifted since then? He's very good on Gaza, but I mean, even people like Tucker Carlson are against a lot of the current wars, and I wouldn't say that means we endorse all of their other politics without any further criticism, certainly in terms of growing the left. So I do think the Greens are an existing party. During the Labour era, I'd have been for them, like the Co-op Party, affiliating to Labour and being allowed in, and there could have been a lot of dual membership. But in terms of uniting the left, I think in some way, the post-Corbyn left, in some ways, it's a red herring. My question to the other panellists would be, could you possibly get together in terms of collective and the Workers' Party? I'm a big supporter of the Workers' Party being allowed into collective as part of that process. I remember during the election, Galloway saying that he'd be willing to take a step back and let Corbyn take the lead of a national challenge at that time. So I think some of these things are about timing. George moving in the fast lane, Jeremy taking a lot longer. But in the long run, I think the ministry to socially conservative workers that the Workers' Party is doing, if I can put it that way, is an important part of the struggle. But it's not necessarily the whole of the working class, just as the much more socially liberal fragments are coming together elsewhere are not the whole of the working class. And if we could bring the two sides together, I think that would be great, especially on the basis of we were all part of the Corbyn movement. We were all part of getting witch hunted by the Starmerites, and often by the Starmerites before they even came to power in the Labour Party in the Corbyn era itself. In terms of Chris and Pamela, hopefully see you on a lot of platforms together again. And in terms of Joe, if you could answer some of those questions about the Greens, if Ken could, if he still wants to join the Green Party, be allowed in, I think that would be a much more fitting way for his career arc to end than the current one, which is just really terrible, driven by the right and the Blairites.
Thank you, Ian. I'm going to go back to our panelists now.
So on the Citizens' Assembly, democracy is a wonderful thing, isn't it, if you can afford it? So we have assemblies at the Law Centre, for example, around housing. But it's become, again, another one of those buzzwords that this is going to solve everything and this will be democratic. If you've got 3 jobs, if you've got several kids that you've got to look after, if you can't afford to get to the venue for an assembly, you're not going to go, basically. And I know that from experience in Harrow. We have assemblies, for example, for housing tenants so that they can come up with solutions. But what's happening is that you're saying, or people are saying, we bring everybody into a room and then we get consensus. Well, consensus doesn't actually help the working class. What happens is those assemblies are usually dominated by those who have the time and the money and are articulate enough to contribute and be involved. It's a very middle class thing. Now, funnily enough, I bumped into at an event I was at yesterday, Tom Wakeford, and he told me that he was the person who set up the second Citizens' Assembly in the UK many, many years ago. And we were debating about how they've gone. Because I agree with Chris, you can't just have an assembly to devise your policy. That's not actually going to help anybody. You need a programme. And then, yes, assemblies are a tool, but they're not actually necessarily the thing that brings democracy. What you need to empower people is to give them the money, the time, the security that they can participate. Absolutely. But it's not the be all and end all. And I think we have to move away from that of thinking this is the solution. This is what democracy is about. It's not. I tell you what would bring about democracy is more or less inequalities, that people had the time to actually get involved in local kind of stuff and decide. Obviously political education as well, but I hear people talking about that quite a lot. But then what do you mean by political education? Unless you understand how kind of the system works, how capital works, how difficult it is to actually change that, how it can't just be a UK thing, that you've got to look internationally as well, then you're not actually going to change much and you're raising people's hopes. In terms of Alan's question, can I confirm or deny? No, I cannot confirm or deny at all. And I wish I could, but I can't. And when there is a time to confirm about a new party, it will be announced, and whoever is going to be involved in that will announce it, but I can't say at the moment. Since 2000, the attempts to build a party, what lessons can we learn from it? I think it's hard because each different party may have failed for different reasons. You could write a book, for example, just on one around militant, couldn't you? Several books have been written. I think the time is different now to what we've had in the past, that people, I have never known a time where people are so anti-politicians. When I was going around in the 2024 general election campaigning, people were vitriolic about the Labour Party. I've never known, when we've had such a unpopular government, that the opposition was equally unpopular. And all you have to look around in the UK, in Europe, people want change. They want a different kind of system. They are so anti-establishment. In Portugal, there was a survey recently, and I can't remember the exact number, but something like 90% of those who responded said that at best politicians were just stupid or something, but really at worst they were all corrupt. So it's a different scenario that we're in, both economically, but the support, the trust of people in politicians has just gone. And the final question, sorry, I'll just go. Can you get together with the Workers' Party? I don't want to be, having to go at any party. I think, Joe, I've known for years and everything. And there are some similarities, but there's also differences within, that people don't agree with some of the policies of the Workers' Party or the Green Party. But during the general election, Collective, who didn't field candidates because it's not a party, but it did support 18 candidates in the general election. And we worked with the Workers' Party. So we had a kind of, not a pact exactly, but, where we saw that there was a socialist candidate, we worked with Hoz, who was the London coordinator at the time for the Workers' Party. So we don't want to, bear any hostility or anything. It's just that for some people, neither of those actually is the solution.
Thanks very much, Pam. You've done well. You did a good job on answering those questions. Can we go to Chris and then to Joe?
Yeah, I'm just going to put my timer on. Yeah, well, I'm pleased to say I kind of agree with virtually everything that Pam said. So it's good that we're speaking from the same hymn sheet still, Pam, after all these years. Yeah, where were the questions now? Alan's question. Norma's question. Well, I mean, I agree with what Pam said about citizens' assemblies, which is kind of reinforcing what I guess I touched on in my opening comments, actually. When I was leader of the council in Derby, we did set up what we called a neighbourhood agenda, and we did set up neighbourhood panels where we did actually empower local people to have an influence over decisions being taken by the council. And we actually managed to bring in other public sector organisations, so the police and the fire service and even the health service. Very difficult to get the health bods on board, but we managed to do that. And so there was some dialogue there, and it was working reasonably well. I have to say, though, and Pam, I think, has made this point, that the people that participated, whilst it was quite a big, significant participation. We used to get meetings of 100 or 200 people sometimes at these neighbourhood forum meetings. It's still a very, very small minority of the overall population in a particular ward of 10 or 11, 12,000 people. And as Pamela said, it's the people that, has got the time or whatever and the wherewithal. And so it's not a panacea. And I think it's useful, and it's something we, need to actually, look at how we can empower people. But we need a coherent populist, left-wing populist program, it seems to me. In terms of lessons, well, look, I wasn't involved in any alternative. I was a member of the Labour Party for 44 years, so it's hard for me to draw any kind of lessons from what went wrong with these other parties in the past. Although I agree again with what Pam said in terms of where we are today is very different. I mean, as you said, the hostility to politicians is absolutely palpable. We are in very, very different times. I still, when respect was in the ascendancy to some extent, naively thinking that if we only could get a good left-wing lead, and I thought the Labour Party was still a democratic institution, that if we could get somebody in that position, we could transform the party, we could transform the country. We got Jeremy, and then Jeremy sort of was unfortunately spending too much time trying to placate the unplacatable, and I ended up being consumed by it. I did try and tell him to stop apologising, but it fell on deaf ears, I regret to say. But I think that the time now is very different to what we've seen in the past. And so we're seeing actually with reform, actually, how they've actually managed to motor along and mop up a lot of support. But I think there's a lot of people who've gone to reform who, if we could get the Workers' Party proposition, that is, before them, I think, we could win some of those people over. Where I slightly disagree with Pam is saying, well, look, there are certain areas where we disagree with the Workers' Party, so we can't be involved. Well, as I was saying at the beginning, let's agree where we agree and have fraternal disagreements where we don't. And I'll be interested to find out, Pam, where those differences are, because I set out the bulk of our programme, and I don't think you would disagree with any of that. I don't think you disagree with any of the more detailed manifesto, but that's a moving feast, and obviously we'll have a different one at the next election. The 10-point programme, I think, is the more important one. But sometimes I think because George is a big figure, they associate some of George's personal views with those of the Workers' Party. Well, that's not and Ian made the point about, the Workers' Party being socially conservative. Well, a lot of people are socially conservative. I'm not socially conservative. I'm a social liberal. There are many people in the Workers' Party who are socially liberal. So, I think, we can make assumptions, and that leads to mistakes about, where the Workers' Party's at. As I say, look, let's agree where we agree, and have those fraternal disagreements where we don't. And Ian's point about, the Workers' Party and, collective, collaborating, well, Pam made the point, there was some collaboration, but as far as any deliberations that collective has been involved with, we've not been invited. We've just been, I don't know whether they've been frozen out, whether that's deliberate. Pam alluded to it, that there's certain things they disagree with. But I think, Pam, if you actually scrutinise the policy, I'd be interested to find which policies you disagree with. I think you'd probably find you agree with all of them.
Thanks very much, Chris. And Joe, would you like to come back to those questions?
Yeah, thanks very much. Ian's question first. Ken Livingstone would be welcome to apply to join the party. I looked into his case in detail when I was considering joining, and I don't think he actually applied. There was public debate in The Guardian and so on about whether it'd be welcome, but I don't think it ever went to a decision. I think test it out. If Ken wants to apply, if anybody here wants to apply to join, then go ahead, apply. And see how it goes. There's no test case, is there, from someone, a key figure on the left who's been denied membership? Ken didn't apply, wasn't denied it. If we want, broad coalition, a party of the left or whatever, if you want to win hearts, minds and votes, then you have to have broad appeal, which doesn't mean being kind of weak or wishy-washy. I agree with what Pamela was saying about it. Be bold, be strong, be radical, and people respond well to that. One of Jeremy Corbyn's strengths was he was genuine, he was authentic, he was the real deal. He didn't, give politicians answers. He gave human answers. And so, the Green Party is attracting people who have been previously aligned with other parties, and that's how it should be. We are growing, and that's you don't grow from like 18-year-olds who haven't been aligned in the previous party before. You grow from people of all ages, all backgrounds, all political experiences. Zach has said sorry to Corbyn and his criticism of Corbyn, that kind of the quote that Ian read out. And he's shared many a platform with Jeremy Corbyn, no, without hesitation. It's not a problem, it's not an issue. Alan asked about, oh yeah, the possible forming of a mass party of the left. Yeah, like I say, to be mass and popular, you do have to appeal to a lot of people, and it kind of relates to, and we've been, some people on the left have been talking about this since 2020 when Corbyn was suspended by the Labour Party, and really I don't think we have the luxury of time to wait anymore. The planet is burning. Fascism is on the rise. There are elections coming. We need to stand candidates. We need to win hearts, minds, and votes. We need to replace the nasty politicians. We need to prevent even more nasty politicians getting in place. And to do that, we need to win elections. And I don't mean water down what we stand for. I mean, we have to stand, we have to campaign, and we have to engage with people on issues that are relevant to them. Which comes to democracy. Let's, like Norma's question, let's have as much democracy as we can in as many places as we can, particularly in the workplace. Democratic workplaces, democratically owned organisations, businesses, cooperatives, social enterprise, and locally owned. These are a key plank of the Green Party manifesto. There's all kinds of tax reliefs that are being suggested in our manifesto for things like creative sector, for zero carbon businesses, for small businesses. This will improve democracy no end, and we have to make politics and democracy interesting and relevant. I confess I've been a little bit bored at some points of this meeting. There is a time and a place for like detailed policy discussions, and that's fine. And meanwhile, we have to get on with convincing people, putting out, winning hearts, minds, and votes, and replacing politicians, the bad ones, with good ones.
Thank you very much, Joe. Right, I've got 5 hands up, so I'm going to take all the people with hands up, but I'm going to ask you please to not go longer than 3 minutes, and then I'm going to come back to the speakers. So I'm first of all going to Robin Debray.
I very much appreciate it that Chris and Pamela and Joe are here to lead this tonight. It's a really important conversation for us to be having. I left the Labour Party about 18 months ago. I was the constituency policy and education officer, and region banned me from holding education sessions that the local constituency executive had approved of, and then banned me and others from posing motions to the local AGM. And it was after that that I felt I couldn't continue to work within the Labour Party. Now, what's important to me is that I'm trusted. So I'm not about to participate in a political party that tells me what to do. I'm very happy to participate in a broad party of the left, but in a way, it needs to be very clear about its strategy. I like very much when, Chris, you talk of class politics. My understanding is that what this country needs is a movement away from capitalism, which means that we need to regulate capital until it serves the people, which is going to mean that we're going to have to be incredibly radical to achieve that. So things like ending the role of the stock exchange, ending the ability of banks to undertake their fractional reserve banking process, where they lend out billions of pounds and rake in the interest as profit. We cannot allow the markets to determine how politicians operate. Both the Conservative and Labour governments are very attentive to the markets. We need to control the markets, and we need to be very blunt about it, that unless we do control the markets, the kind of world that I believe we're all seeking to live in just will not come about. So yes, let's have a broad alliance, a broad coalition of all organisations that are pursuing this quality of left program, but let's not hide behind any fears that we might have that people are not going to come along with a radical program. Let's be honest, let's be straight, let's be clear, let's have a strategy which will bring us away from this monopolistic, capitalist, imperialist world that we live in, and not shirk from it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin. I'm going to bring in Aubrey now.
Thank you. I've got a question really for Pam. I speak actually as the inventor of the Respect Party. I can tell you it began in a coffee bar in the centre of Brixton at a meeting of the local Stop the War group. And that was the initial point which became Respect. I was personally very opposed to the decision to form a party. I thought it was grossly premature. Now, I really congratulate Pam because I think she's done a phenomenal job in bringing collective together. Now, my question to Pam, what approach have you made, or what approach have you had, or what would be your approach to the Communist Party, and I mean the Morning Star Communist Party, on the one hand, and on the other hand, to international bodies? La France Insoumise is the obvious case in point. Mélenchon has been staggeringly successful, and so what is this? What sort of relationship do you have with A, the Communist Party, and B, La France Insoumise?
Thank you very much, Aubrey. Good question. I'm going to bring in Malcolm now. Malcolm Malay.
Thank you to all the speakers. I live in Portugal. I've lived here for 30 years, so you might think UK politics are no interest to me, but I have a large family living there, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, etc. And I was in the Labour Party during the Corbyn years, but left soon after Starmer appeared. It's currently assumed, it's now assumed by everybody, I think, should be some wonderful mass workers' party which will break the mould of almost everything you can think of, and almost everything you can think of does need its mould breaking. But the question is, in current way British politics is set up, I suppose you have to have a leader or a leadership, and that's where it seems to be difficult. So who would the new leader be, and does the leader need to be charismatic? I mean, some people think they do, some people think they don't. So it seems to me on the scene at the moment, there's only two people who might really fit the bill, and one is George Galloway, who I don't personally know, and the other is Jeremy Corbyn, who I also don't personally know. I have enormous respect for George Galloway. I think he's an amazing person. He's done all sorts of incredible things, but I don't think he's the right person. I can't tell you why I think that. And so we're left with Jeremy. Well, Jeremy trebled, as you'll remember, the Labour Party membership when he was in power, which was an incredible feat. I mean, it was actually a mass working class, if that's the right word, party that he created or happened around him. I don't quite know. But as we all know, he was attacked by all sorts of people. And for me, the turning point with Jeremy, who I still have enormous respect, was when he was confronted by the multi-millionaire Zionist Hodge, who called him either an anti-Semite and racist, or maybe called him a fucking anti-Semite and racist. It seems to be in doubt. So the question is, do you think Jeremy Corbyn could cut it next time? And if he can't, because of the baggage he's now carrying with a lot of the electorate, who else would it be? Or does it have to be anybody? And I suppose the question is really aimed mainly at Chris Wilkinson. Not especially, but I mean, maybe. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Carol. I'm here from the Network of Independent Socialists. Well, I'm a member of that. I'm also a member of the RLEF. I have three questions. The first is to the Workers' Party, the Green Party, and the RLEF, and it's at what stage in the formation of a new mass party would your organisations be prepared to liquidate themselves because something bigger and more unified and of greater significance in terms of confronting capitalism and confronting all the multiple capitalist crises we have is being formed? The second question to Pamela, and it is, how come you're so sure that the past failures of the various left parties or attempts to build significant left parties belong to a separate era? I don't think we're in a separate era. We are in different circumstances, but then those parties were, well, the attempts to form them was in circumstances that were different from, for instance, the 1970s or the 1980s. But we're not in a different era. We still have neoliberalism, although it is being challenged by protectionism. Because I feel that there are common denominators, and the big common denominator for me is starting from a leader figure. Who do we want as leader? These parties have been formed around people like Scargill, Galloway, Corbyn, blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't work. It's undemocratic, or lack of internal democracy is a consequence too often of that kind of approach to party building. And that's why it's relevant. So my question is, why do you say we are in a completely different circumstances? Because I don't think we are. And the third question, and that is to everybody who's spoken, what is the relative weight that you would put on standing in elections compared to building up local and national, the local and national capacity of people to actually fight back against what is being done to the working class, to oppressed groups in this society, to Palestinians, to Latin Americans working in Los Angeles? What is being done about the climate crisis? What is being done about the degradation of the food supply? And we need to take on
John, can I ask you to draw it
those
to a close
issues.
now, please?
We need to build that capacity. Why do some people think that standing in elections is going to get us there and is more important?
Okay, thank you very much, John. Yeah, really good questions. I'm going to bring in Conchita, and then Mike will be the last person from the floor. Conchita, if you could please keep it brief.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
This is also for Chris, because I think he was a member of DM25, and the structure and the means of getting working class people to contribute in so many different things was so good on the DM25 platform. Everything happened online. It was very democratic. You got to read everything that was presented. It could have been videos. It could have been policy papers. Every single person who was a member could vote and express their wishes on any topic. And it was the platform, the online platform, which, like Pamela said, it helped me. I didn't have to leave home. I didn't have to leave Harleston. I didn't have to pay any money. I just simply needed to invest the time from home to read as much as I could. Another thing they did was anybody who was a member might be picked automatically at random to become a part of a organizing team within the structure online. So, Chris, if you were a member of DiEM25, maybe you can answer on how appropriate it might be to unify everybody in a platform such as DiEM25's. If you could borrow it or hire it, maybe, in order to unify everybody in it. That's it.
Thanks very much, Conchita. That sounds absolutely fantastic, really democratic. I'm going to bring in Mike now.
Hi, well, thanks, Chris, Pamela, and Joe. Really, I mean, you know, we're scratching the surface here, but the questions I want to ask, I mean, I'm speaking as somebody who was never in the Labour Party because I always saw it as a party which was set up, you know, by trade union leaders to get a bigger voice, but has been used from the get-go as a means of getting ruling class ideas to dominate amongst the working class. Right from the very start, Labour has played that role. And it's, you know, it's reaching its end game at the moment, you know, where we see Labour as being indistinguishable from Reform in many respects. And within that, you know, the issues we're confronted with a massive, unnecessary for the ruling class deprivation of democracy. So absolutely democracy here, but also democracy around the rest of the world. Imperialism is requiring that the rest of the world is subjugated, and that people are, well, we're watching in Gaza. They are being wiped out to serve the interests of the geopolitics of the imperialists. And at the same time, the continued investment in fossil fuels, absolutely indefensible. You know, do these people think they're going to be immune from the climate collapse, the world collapse, which is going to come about? Apparently, some of them do. You know, they think a bolt hole in New Zealand is going to save them. Well, it ain't. But so these are the kind of, you know, over and beyond the day-to-day questions, these are the things that really bother people. You know, this is why it is a really insecure world. I gain strength when I am out on the street with, you know, some of the Gaza demonstrations, some of the huge Gaza demonstrations. We, the people, we won't be silenced. Stop the bombing. And we can put forward a whole load of other slogans. So that is where power has to reside. And that is what any party has to be able to address. And in Britain, we have this issue of what we call the crown. The crown is the means by which the state has been able to provide a continuity through a combination of sort of flummery and royal nonsense and you know, really savage power where needed to come down hard on the working class or anybody who is speaking out, like right now, lots of journalists.
Can I ask you please to draw it to a close now?
Yep. Well, I'm bringing it to the point. These are the issues I really want all three of you to address these issues in particular. And Joe, I have to say, I live in Suffolk. I voted Green. Adrian is my MP. The only time I didn't was 2019 because I felt I could vote Labour without holding my nose. But, you know, supporting NATO, absolutely wrong. And, you know, a sort of position on Israel that, you know, Israel has rights too. No, it doesn't. Not in its present form. No, it doesn't. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring Steve back in again so that he can also come to some of those questions as well. So Steve Freeman, I'm going to now also spotlight and come to all the speakers to come back to those questions and contributions. Let's start with Chris this time.
Robin's point about a radical approach to the economy, absolutely, totally on board with that. I do think we need to take on the markets. We're not powerless in the face of the markets. They are very powerful, of course, but I do think we need to be bold and brave and bring forward an economic proposition to actually do just that. In fact, I'm working on this with some economists, people like Steve Keen, people who are keen to work with the Workers' Party, which we're very pleased about, to try and develop a radical alternative economic strategy. Any left-wing government, any socialist government that comes to power is always going to be attacked by the markets, and we need to be ready for that, and we need to have, the political will, as it were, to take them on, because at the end of the day, we financialized the economy. We smashed our manufacturing base. It's been offshored to low wage economies around the world, so the capitalists can get access to cheap labor, and it's left the working class high and dry all over the country. And so, yeah, I mean, I think his point is well made, and we certainly support that. And as I say, we're developing a policy agenda to address that specific point. Aubrey's question was directed at Pam, so I'll leave Pam to deal with that. Malcolm's point about leader, whether Jeremy would be a good leader. Well, look, Jeremy still has resonance with a lot of people. I think his stock has fallen somewhat. I think he's missed the boat to some extent. I think he should have actually done more in the last general election. I think he should have endorsed the Workers' Party and other candidates. I think that might have made a difference. He might have enabled a few people to get over the line, but unfortunately he focused too much on his own constituency and getting re-elected in Islington North. Whether Jeremy would be, well, as I say, the George made the point that we would defer to him because he's got that resonance and he could draw people in. But at the end of the day, Jeremy's getting on. Jeremy's what is he now, 76. We need to at some point move beyond Jeremy. And Jeremy made a lot of mistakes as a leader. Anybody's going to make a lot of mistakes, but his biggest mistake was capitulating to the Zionist lobby, and to try and keep the Parliamentary Labour Party together, to reject the democracy forms that I was leading on, to accept the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism. Jeremy signed his death warrant in the September of 2018 when he accepted the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism, instead of coming out of that NEC meeting where he'd lost the vote and saying, well, I've lost the vote at the NEC, but I'm the leader. I'm going to take this onto the floor of the conference later this month because I think they're wrong. They were wrong. And they used that then against no end of people, including myself, to get them kicked out of the Labour Party. It was a scam, and he should have been clearer on that. And he was also wrong to put all his energies into trying to keep the Parliamentary Labour Party together, and by rejecting and asking Len McCluskey to vote against the democracy reforms at the 2018 conference. That was disastrous, because the Parliamentary Labour Party were on the ropes, and by giving them that reprieve, and by empowering them with this anti-Semitism scam by accepting the IHRA was crazy. So I don't know whether Jeremy would be the right person to lead. He would be in terms of, I think, bringing people to a movement, but whether he's up for that, I just don't know. I mean, as I say, he should have. I mean, I was asking Jeremy years ago to say, can we get together? We need to work together. We need to collaborate, to build a movement. But he never responded to that. And as I say, he didn't do anything in the last election when I think was the appropriate time to have done it. But he may still, hopefully, come good and do something that would enable us to sort of build something. But Jeremy, as I say, is getting on. You can't expect him to carry on leading the party. We've got to move beyond him at some point. John's point about would the Workers' Party liquidate if a new entity came onto the scene? I don't think it's going to work like that, frankly. I mean, great if something did, but how's that going to happen? I think the step would have to be some sort of alliance, similar to what they've achieved in France. Jean-Luc Mélenchon, they brought all these groups together. I think that's the way to do it. Now there might be a significant figure that emerges who would be the kind of the leader of that or whatever. But it would enable the different groups to maintain their identity. I'm not against necessarily liquidating, but I just don't think suddenly we're going to get some fantastic vehicle that's going to galvanise all these people, and we'll all kind of run to join forces with it. I just don't think practically that is how it will work. And the point that I think John and indeed Mike was touching on about, the need for a movement and the power on the streets, etc. Well, yeah, that is important. But in the end, you need political power in the chambers where the decisions are taken. And short of a revolution, and I don't think there's an appetite in this country for a revolution, the only vehicle we've therefore got is the democratic process, elections. And so whilst it's important that we build a movement, we also need, I think, to find a way of participating in elections to the best possible effect. And the way to do that, as I've already said, is to collaborate and agree where we agree and have fraternal disagreements where we don't. I mean, Mike's point about the end game of the Labour Party, has now been reached. Well, I think the end game was reached nearly 50 years ago when Healy, as we were saying at the beginning, there went to the International Monetary Fund, and essentially it was that Labour government after Wilson stepped down that heralded in the monetarist neoliberal agenda that was then turbocharged by Thatcher. And Conchita's point about DM25, yeah, I mean, again, good forum to bring people together. Not a panacea in its own right, but it's a good way of empowering people, bringing people in and getting them hopefully mobilised and engaged. And yes, I was and still am actually a member of DM25. So, I do see the benefit of that. And it's in the sense, this notion of finding ways of agreeing with and working together, and that's why I've joined. I don't sort of participate hugely in what they do, but I still pay my monthly subscription to them.
Thanks very much, Chris. I'll go to Joe next.
Great. Thanks very much. So in order of the last questions that were asked, Robin, yeah, I don't want to be part of a party that tells me what to do either, and fortunately I'm not. The Green Party doesn't have a whip. It doesn't impose its will on Green councillors or Green MPs about how you should vote, because that's a way of putting the party line before what it's in the best interest of the people you represent. The Green Party doesn't do that. We do often vote the same as each other, and that's because we've talked about it, because we've discussed the evidence, and we come to it often a very similar view. And we do have a clear strategy. You're absolutely right, we need one. It's putting people and the environment first. We want a fairer, greener country. It's very simple. Right. There's a few questions that weren't addressed to me, so I'll skip over. I do agree that parties have leaders. Sometimes in the Green Party it's co-leaders. Sometimes it's one single leader. And I do think Zach has the personality, and the communication skills to be a really effective leader from the left, to be challenging all the other elected parties from the left to be putting forward green alternatives and left-wing alternatives that are absolutely so needed. He's very accessible, he's pretty open, he travels up and down the country. When Jewish Labour movement were saying that the Green Party should remove me as a candidate, he came to my ward, he stood shoulder to shoulder with me and helped me win that election. One of the first former Labour politicians who was re-elected as a Green, and there's now more than 20. It's definitely a can-do thing. How to balance that dilemma John talked about standing in elections versus building local and national capacity to fight back. In my experience, it's one and the same thing. Depends partly on the election cycle, but good politicians come out of these social movements, and mobilizing people for elections tends to generate a lot of people to come forward, in my experience with the Green Party. And we also in Labour as well, in the general election campaigns under Corbyn, there's mass mobilisation of people. And I think partly we're yearning back for that. We want to feel that same football team spirit that we had in those days. And I actually don't think we're going to do that through a new party. What Mike said is important about, and also Conchita, like the democratic models that DM25 have, we can learn a lot from. The Green Party is open to different creative ways of organising, of different creative ways of forming democracy and accountability. So Mike, thank you so much for voting Green in the general election. You lucky person. You've got a Green MP to represent your and advocate for your views. And I hope there'll be many dozens and dozens more come the next general election. The Green Party does have a policy of staying within NATO and reforming it. I personally don't agree with that. I'm on the public record to say so. And so is Zach. Zach has said the UK should leave NATO. NATO might well dissolve anyway if Trump pulls the USA out of it. We absolutely need to be putting diplomacy, development, peaceful de-escalation of issues, of conflicts first. We need to taking the arms out of a situation, putting the guns down, and then putting them beyond use. That's absolutely what needs to happen in the Middle East, big time, and other places like Ukraine. And the hypocrisy in our foreign policy there. The Green Party is the party of the left. We already exist. We've got 4 MPs, 850 councillors. We've got open democracy. We've got roots in for anybody who wants to join us. The Green Party is already a coalition. Local parties have lots of autonomy. They can choose their own candidates, for example. They can choose local policies that are relevant to their place. It's also a coalition of people coming from a social justice perspective primarily, and people coming from an environmental justice perspective. And that's the kind of coalition that this country so desperately needs. I hope you join us, and I hope if you can't, that we find ways to work together. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Jo. Pamela, we go to you next.
Robin, absolutely agree with you. We have to move away from capitalism. And if we haven't learned by now that you can't manage capitalism, we are going to fail. That's why we need to move away. It's no good asking people to play nicely, pay a little bit more tax, be nice. That's not going to work. Aubrey, would the Communist Party be welcome in the collective? So the Communist Party of Great Britain, I think we had somebody from there initially in our meeting. I don't think they would want to dissolve, but they are very small now, the Communist Party of Great Britain. There are not many members, but we do have the Revolutionary Communist Party in the collective, and they have got a very young membership and have bought a building outright for 1.4 million with lots of young people. So when people say that young people are not interested in getting involved in politics, they are actually. And if you hear lots of the young people who really kind of study the class kind of movement and everything, I'm quite inspired by them. So, but yes, they would be welcome. Got no problem with communists in the collective. And in fact, quite often when you ask people, are you a socialist now? They will respond, no, I'm a communist. And that is because things have changed so much. Get onto the different era in a minute. Malcolm, the leader, who would be the leader? So I believe that Jeremy is the only person who can unify the left at the moment, who can bring people together in whatever form that takes. However, when I started this from Collective, I absolutely was insistent that we needed a democratic party with class-based politics, and that it shouldn't be built around any one individual. You obviously need to have a leader, but there has to be a democratic process to find that leader, and they would be elected. So if a new party comes about, then the intention, and I would hope this is followed through, but you never know because politics is a strange thing, that very shortly after, you need a leader to register a party, but very shortly after that would be elections to elect a leader going forward. And I've seen loads of really excellent young people out on the street speaking at events who are fantastic, who I think amazing leaders, but they don't get a platform. It's often the same people that you see on all the kind of main left platforms, the same speakers that are speaking at the protests, the same speakers often saying the same things. It's about time we gave somebody else a bit of a chance, I think. John. I think that was about the leader as well, and also the weight given to whether elections, standing in elections or building in the community. Now, I think you need both. You know, I've been in a trade union since I was a teenager. I joined a trade union because all I saw were my friends' dads who were on building sites getting killed on the building sites because they weren't in trade unions. They didn't have any protections. They couldn't speak up. So I've been involved in mobilizing people, agitating, organizing all my life, all my adult life, and probably, my teenage life as well. You need that, but you need a party structure as well. Because how do people in areas of real poverty manage to organize? How do you rent a room, for example, for a public meeting? How do you get leaflets printed? How do you get people with the time to knock on doors? You need a party structure at the very least to distribute money. So it's not just going to people who are known to people, it's going to different areas so that people can organise. And then ultimately, the only way you can change things currently is through the parliamentary process. And so if you want to change laws, that's the only thing we can do at the moment. We might have a revolution. Who knows? I think things are getting so bad for people that the group who are affected are no longer just the kind of working class people on benefits. You've got a whole class of people, educated middle class people who can't afford a home, for example, who've got no hope of a pension, are having to move home every year because they've got no security of tenure. So who knows? But revolutions can be bad as well as good because, people get hurt and, again, what will happen after that? Mike, the Crown, yes, I disagree with the Crown. Again, it goes to the wealth issue. I think someone asked about internationalism as well, which I haven't covered and I can't find who said it now. But yes, absolutely, you've got to have an internationalist approach because if you don't, you can do what you could nationalise everything in the UK, but what would happen? There'd be pressure coming from outside. So you need to work with comrades, with the working class across the world, really. But a start would be Europe. Mélenchon, yes, somebody mentioned he's a strong leader. Yes, he's very strong when he's strong. He gets a lot of support when he's firm and strong. When he tries to build alliances with people, with parties that are not so left, then actually his popularity goes down. And that's something that should tell us something. Do I think that we're in a very separate era? That was what John asked as well, that you don't think we are in a very different era? I would say, yes, lots of the factors around poverty we've seen before. What I have not seen is this issue of people being so anti-establishment politics. And that is the key difference here, I think. And it's not just the UK, as I've said before. It's across Europe, it's in America. People saying to me, and people who say, oh, we just need good politicians and we need to share some of the common things that we believe. That's not going to do it because we've had politicians who've tinkered around the edges. And that's why I'm afraid we've got the nasty politicians now. We've got the people like Trump. If you think about all the history of what happened with Obama, who was happy when Obama got elected? Look what he did. You can follow it through with Labour or whoever in all different countries. I hope I've covered everything. Sorry, as I said, my writing's appalling.
No, I think you've covered it very well, Pamela. Thank you. And finally, we're going to go to Steve now to address.
Thank you, comrades. I've really enjoyed listening to our speakers, and I didn't really know when I was trying to get them to speak that they're all really close comrades or knew each other very well from Labour Party days. So it was a kind of happy coincidence, and it was good to hear the different approaches, and there's a lot in common as well. I mean, that's the thing I would say. There is a lot in common, and I hope that we would see that. We mentioned France Insoumise. We in the Republican Labour Education Forum think France Insoumise is a very interesting model and been very successful, and it has been a kind of coalition, and it is a Republican party. And you think, well, how can it be a Republican party? It's in a republic. France Insoumise wants to abolish the Fifth Republic, which is not democratic, and replace it by the Sixth Republic, a new republic decided by the people. So that's the model that we, I think, I don't want to say that the RAF has endorsed that, but certainly some of us in RAF think that that would be a good model that's relevant for how the left could operate in Britain. It doesn't mean that there wouldn't still be socialist parties, green parties, or whatever in such a coalition. So I do think there is a lot we should think about. It is a left populist party that Chris, and I know George has spoken, George Galloway has spoken about that. On the question of personality and program, I think program, which is your strategic goal, your goal is so much more important than personality. I mean, leaders are important. Leaders lead, don't they? And they have to have the confidence. So I'm not knocking leaders, but if Jeremy Corbyn was to die tomorrow or George was to die tomorrow, where would we be? Well, if you've got a program, then you carry on with the program, because unfortunately it's sad, etc. But the party continues. The party lives beyond an individual, beyond a person. When I was a long-time member of the SWP, they had Tony Cliff, but they never really had a program. So they really depended on him. And he was very charismatic person, but when he'd gone, then the whole thing was a different ball game altogether. So we don't want to depend on personality. We need leaders. We need democracy so we can choose the best leaders, or just have a chance of choosing which leaders are good and not so good. I would say that we are in a different epoch. I think we've been in a different epoch since 2008. We've called it the degenerated social monarchy. In other words, the degenerated welfare state. We cannot put it back together again. Try though we might. We've busted the whole 1940s. So Chris refers to 1945, as a model. But we can't, unfortunately, in my opinion, go back to that, because it's been so. We can only go back to it, and that only came out of war conditions, by the way, because the whole war made things differently. If we had a powerful democratic system that could really do that, which leads me back to the question, I think, of democracy. And I think the big thing here for me is ends and means. Nobody really we had a lot of talk about ends, but we didn't talk about means. And we always say, well, people want food. They're not interested in who owns the bakery. But who owns the bakery is deciding how many loaves get made and what price they will be. So the ownership of the bakery, who controls the bakery, is really, really important, even though people are starving. If you go to Gaza, does it matter when people are starving whether their food comes by the Americans and the Israelis, or it comes by the United Nations? Of course it does. The means of getting that food there makes such a difference. And what I'm suggesting is, we're not thinking hard enough about democratic means. I looked at the Green Party manifesto on democracy, and I was slightly disappointed, because I always say, the Green Party is a Republican party, but in the manifesto it doesn't come up there. It comes up only replacing the House of Lords and PR and votes at 16. And George, I think the Workers' Party was better, but they said they had something here, which again, we would say, for us, the crown is the problem, says the manifesto. It's the heir to feudalism and is used to cover for maintaining capitalist structures that exploit and manipulate the population. That's great, and then we'd kind of agree with that. And then it goes on saying, but we also recognise the identity of many British workers, including they see it as a guarantee of service, and begin to go against what was just being said. For us, the crown is not the king, it's the political power of the state. And if we have to do something about that political power of the state, and it's the executive power, and it's that executive power that controls Parliament. If you've seen, I'll finish on this point, but if you watch Prime Minister's Question Time, as we all do, what a shambles that is. What a disgrace to any democratic place to have a parliament like that, and the people shouting and bawling and going on there is just it's just not a serious place. We should get rid of it and start again. I said an English parliament, abolish the House of Commons, not just the House of Lords. Have a proper parliament, democratically elected, in the middle of the country, where all parts of the country could identify with, instead of everything being London-centric. So I'm going to end on that point. I don't think that the left that's still my charge against the speakers. We're not going deep enough into the question of democracy, and we're not going seriously enough into democracy. And in a crisis of democracy, we will be forced to do that, because authoritarianism is growing, fascism is growing, and how are we going to defend it if we don't make a very, very powerful democratic case for democratic change?
Thank you very much, Steve. I think that's a really good place to end. I absolutely agree with you. We have to take on the crown and the whole system and change it. If we tinker around the edges, we will actually make no progress. And any progress we do make will be clawed back by the crown and the state and the establishment. Thank you very much indeed to all our speakers. It's been a wonderful evening. Great discussion. Thank you to Chris, thank you to Pamela, thank you to Joe and to Steve, and to all the people who have attended and have asked questions and made contributions. Thank you to everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evening.